What is it like to be a mother? What is it like to be a mother giving birth to a child? What is it like to be a mother who gives birth to a child in a part of the world where there is injustice? What is it like to be a mother? What is it like to give birth to a child in a part of a world where there is war, where there is the shaking of the foundations? What is it like? And my thoughts are largely in terms this morning of what it must have been like to be Mary. And I went in that direction after thought and prayer, partly also because I saw this front page in a supplement of one of our newspapers. A young mother with child, my baby, the refugee. My baby, the refugee. What is it like to be a mother? What is it like to give birth to a child in a world that is shaking in its foundations? Let me give you some word pictures. You may have seen them on the television screens. What is it like to be a mother? What is it like to give birth to a child? What is it like to give birth to a boy who is 10 years old and they gave him a gun? They tell him how to use it, how to kill without qualm or doubt. And this young boy I saw on the television will see and experience things that no child should have to witness. Abducted when he was 10. Girls taken become forced wives. They say more than 1,200 children are understood to have been born in captivity to these young wives. Children born in captivity ask, am I Ugandan? Am I Sudanese? Am I a bush person? The majority do not know, or will ever know. I've been seeing and reading in Uganda there is a rehabilitation centre that uses art as therapy for those freed from the brutal militia, the Lord's Resistance Army in northern Uganda. One young person is instant saying, thinking of what I have done, sometimes I find myself shivering. Another television program, I see a young Palestinian girl, I guess around 17 or 18. She says simply, I was born in war, I live in war, and I will die in war. Huub Oosterhuis, a Dutch theologian, explodes with some fury in one of his books to shout that we, the humans, we were not born to hate, we were not born to kill. Seemingly against all odds, he shouts that we were born to love, we were born to share, and we were born to respect. In this fading year, we've talked and heard a great deal about devastation. We've seen graphic pictures thrown before us. One of the most graphic moments of the 13/11 in Paris was the newspaper, like many, which gave you the pictures of people we shall never, ever meet. All young people, not middle-aged, not people of older age, but young people. Here are their pictures displayed. And in this fading year, we've talked and heard a great deal about two major wars of the 20th century. And in thinking about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and thinking about that, I was also at the same time trying to get some sense of what it must be like, if I can ever grasp more than 10% of what it can be like to be a mother of a child, born in war. I never really talked to my own mother. about the Second World War. I suppose partly because I skirted around it because I sensed her pain if I mentioned the subject. She was a young woman in her late teens, and she lost her brothers, especially the one called Jamie, the one whose name she constantly called out when she was dying a few Christmases ago. She kept saying his name, Jamie, Jamie. I never really talked about how it was for her, a young and just married woman, how it was for her to see my father leave home for the army and to wonder whether there was the last linger, a last holding, the last kiss. And into the war years, she would herself become pregnant. She would carry a child, a son, a baby, a young child. I never really asked whether it was the case of just in case, but of what dreams and hopes are possible in the midst of life's uncertainty. What dreams, if any, did she have in the midst of blatant insecurity, the not knowing, and yet... So like I said, I drift this way this morning because I want somehow to travel, insofar as I can do so, the mind journey of that young girl, probably in her late teens. And her name was Mary. Her world was one of national subjugation to a foreign power, of possible brutality, always hovering, often present for her, and as any Jewish woman, the dream that she might one day carry the long-expected Messiah, the one who would set his people free, who would rid the Romans of their powerful and intrusive presence, the one who would usher in a new world in spite of. And there in those beautiful scriptural passages that we've heard read over the past few weeks, that young, probably teenage girl is told that she is the chosen one. She is told to rejoice, but there is not a single indication that she rejoiced. You could say that her difficulties increased even after Joseph had been told she remains alone. The world around her remained the same. The people around her remained the same, even if curious about that bump, the swelling of her womb. And in the 4th month of her pregnancy, she decides to leave. She visits her aunt, who is in her 9th month. And you have this extraordinary, in just 1 or 2 verses to me, a just amazing, dramatic sense of she is passing through towns and through villages, along roads and over rivers. She's passing hundreds and hundreds of people who had their dreams, who themselves desired for a new world, a world of peace where women, mothers, fathers could bring up children without fear, without fright. Here she is. Can you imagine her maybe here, a young woman this morning, walking here on her journey around us through these aisles? The extraordinary thing in terms of the scripture, and to me it's such a powerful image, she is passing doubtless hundreds and hundreds of people, but they did not know. They did not know that here in the midst of her was this young teenage girl in her womb carrying the promised Messiah. But all is the same. All is the same until she meets her aunt. And even it seems Elizabeth did not notice anything by herself. It was the baby in her womb, that strange prophet John to be, who suddenly kicks her with such force that she gave a loud cry. And in an extraordinary moment which... I keep thinking if this was a drama or a play, how you would direct it, because it has so much happening within such a space, and we're not used to silences, but there must be lots of silence, pauses. The old lady looks at this young girl, And she utters such powerful, such emotive words that came from within her, that possessed her for that moment. She suddenly explodes and she says, "Blessed be the fruit of your womb. Blessed be the mother of my Lord. Blessed be you." And from that moment, peace on earth. For that moment, the announcement of hope. For that moment, the announcement of life yet to be born and yet waiting to be. It is here in this moment that Mary obeys the command to rejoice, and spiritual fireworks exploding, and all that had been hidden in her exploded, because now she knew. It's Joseph Dundas, the great preacher who was preaching when I was in Nairobi many, many years ago, who talked a great deal about Mary in the way which I've just said. He said, could the world now change? Could the whole of the human condition change? Oh, she cried out with joy. Surely for any woman who wants and desires unbridled joy, joy in the midst of war, joy in the midst of occupation, joy still in the midst of war, in the midst of occupation. I have one great picture, one wonderful picture of my mother and me as a baby, holding me high, and such was the joy and wonder in her eyes. I have never forgotten that picture which we have. What was it like? For her, with my father in the army, in war, not knowing whether he would or not return, what was it for her like to give birth to a child on her own there, not without his presence? Though, of course, if you know the Jewish traditions in terms of the New Testament, the father was never present at the birth of a child. There's a writer, you may know, you may read, I'm not sure whether I should tell you the newspaper, since it's getting already lots of plugs this morning. But there's a writer called Tim Lott. Tim Lott says, writing in this newspaper, he says Christmas reminds him of how well the British do what he calls religion light. So what is religion light for Tim Lott, the writer? Religion light for him is singing carols outside the tube station. It's singing carols outside the tube station with a group of people, but not believing. He says of the nature of Christianity and of Christmas in general, he says it is a pantomime that we should join in together and play out what it would... Sorry, I'll start again. He says Christmas in general is a pantomime that we join in together and play out what it would feel like if we really did believe. Oh, he says the same thing happens in a large part of our cultural life, whether it be at weddings or funerals or church schools, or at least he says that the one his daughter attends. Well, I cannot dispute, can I? I cannot dispute how he feels, how other people like him feel. But have the churches so sentimentalized the faith, especially here at Christmas, that it's lost its own birth, that birth in the midst of what much of the world ever knows? Bombs may not fall over us, but for some, maybe you, this is a Christmas without dad or mum, son or daughter, maybe from the conflicts of recent years. And you've seen on your television screens the reflection, the recent news from Afghanistan. It must have hit many people hard to see areas retaken by the Taliban when they themselves have lost their sons and maybe their daughters. And people have been asking the question, for what? But there is one element left, and it's there in the gospel today. It's enshrined in the word that's before us, the word in that picture I gave you, which is that one word, refugee. For if Scripture has within itself beauty, need to repeat from earlier that beauty is grounded in harsh reality, for we are hurled from the nativity stories into the brutality of a ruler who fears for his rule, who with the power of an ISIS of now wishes to see all of the young babies taken and killed because he wants to preserve his own power, his own tyranny. From the beauty and the majesty of the stories of the shepherds, moving on the lectionary, if you like, next week of the wise men, but in the beauty of the narratives, in the beauty of considering Mary and her child, all is taking place not in some pleasant idyllic situation in the palaces of the rich. It's there taking place in the brutality of humankind. And within the gospel narratives, Joseph and Mary must take flight, leave home, the child's safety paramount. We hardly ever sing. And I've been racking my brains, you can maybe tell me later, about any hymns written about this. Hymn writers much prefer gazing at a newborn baby. They much prefer to announce things as it was by the shepherds and the wise men. They much prefer to sing of Joseph and Mary and Jesus. But in the gospel narratives, Mary and Joseph become refugees. The first, I don't know. As Joseph Dundas, who I mentioned earlier, who was preaching in Nairobi many years ago, a wonderful Irish preacher. He says, a life so new that it made him immediately a refugee in this world. A life so new that it made him immediately a refugee in this world, a stranger, and yet the master of all. Here, as he says, in this world setting that has enabled the faith to survive, because the faith has survived in persecution and disorder, here is the one to whom we are drawn. Donda says we don't need more programs. We don't need more schedules. We need the Christ. You doubtless have seen Her Majesty the Queen in her broadcast. You notice every year at the moment she keeps wanting to say she is a Christian. Every year at the moment, year after year, she keeps talking about the Christian message. But in one sense this year she gets so far, and then it's about the light that shines in the darkness. As Christians, the Word has become flesh. He was in the world, and yet the world knew him not. To those who believed in him gave he the power to become the sons and the daughters of God.